All right, everybody, welcome back to class. Today we're going to have a discussion about the NAGI model of disablement. We're also going to take a look at a couple of other gait patterns, one from an individual who has cerebral palsy and another from an individual who has multiple sclerosis. Cerebral palsy is now I'm not an expert at cerebral palsy, nor am I an expert at multiple sclerosis. Cerebral palsy is a movement disorder that oftentimes occurs at birth or is caused by a lack of oxygen at birth, and multiple sclerosis is caused by a deterioration of your myelin sheaths around your motor neurons, which and both of those particular disorders, they cause difficulty with movement patterns. So I'd like to talk a little bit about what those movement patterns are and what a normal movement, quote, normal movement pattern is, and maybe what our goal as physical therapists or as people who are going to be working with people who are walking, running, and doing all sorts of movement in the future. So that's the goal for the day. Just to make sure that you're all aware, on the Monday we get back from Thanksgiving, we'll do a review for exam number 3. And on the Wednesday after that, that's the final day of class. And that's when the final exam will be available to you. You'll have until Sunday evening to work on the final exam. You also have until Sunday evening to work on the corrections for exam number 1 and exam number 2 that I sent to you a little while ago. And then as of Sunday night, I'm going to close out the grades for the class, and I'll work on tabulating your final grades. So with that, what I'd like to do is a screen share and get going with our course for the day. I'm going to show you a couple of videos. The first video is of an individual who has cerebral palsy. We're going to watch this video in slow-mo, and then maybe what you can do is, as you watch the video, you can just make a couple of observations, take a couple of notes, and then we can explain or talk a little bit about what's going on in this video. So remember, last class we talked about this interaction between ground reaction force and your limbs and your moment arms, and how this ability to store energy and conserve energy occurs, such that human walking can occur without massive amounts of energy expenditure. Maybe as you watch this walking pattern, I want you to consider whether or not it's, quote, normal or not. It may be atypical, but what's the definition of normal? You'll notice as she lifts up her right foot, there's a lot of inversion there, but it doesn't really roll all the way into pronation. You see her right arm is pretty stiff. You see she's moving more left and right laterally as opposed to forward and back. All right, let's watch this again a couple more times. You'll notice when her right foot hits the ground, this foot here, the right foot hits the ground, it's always on forefoot, and her heel never hits the ground, so she never has this heel toe plantar flexion action. Her left foot hits the ground, right? Her left foot heel toe, and her right foot is only on toe. Left foot heel toe, and right foot's only on toe. If you notice here, her left arm moves, but her right arm does not move. You can see her left arm swings like a pendulum there, and her right arm is locked by her side. Her left foot hits the ground such that the heel hits the ground, and maybe there's a little plantar flexion, but her right foot does not. So it seems as though that her left side is functioning differently than her right side. Seems as though her left side has a little bit more of a pendulum action in her arm and in her leg, and her right arm doesn't have much of that pendulum action. If you take a look at the placement of the left foot goes in front of the right foot, and then the right foot catches up to the left foot. Left foot in front, right foot catches up. Left foot in front, right foot catches up. All right. So there seems to be some type of bilateral difference in what's going on here. Now, the question is why and how, and is this a normal gait pattern? And I think that what we want to do, that's a loaded question. Of course, this is a normal gait pattern. It's a normal gait pattern for this individual. It might not be a gait pattern that you and I choose, but why is this gait pattern emerging? So it seems as though that the right side of her body has a pretty good amount of stiffness. It also has probably a good amount of co-contraction. I'll show you what that means a little bit. But it seems as though that there's a difference between what the left side of the body is doing and what the right side is doing. It seems as though the left side of the body is able to utilize more of a conservation of energy between kinetic and potential energy, but the right side of the body is using spring energy. So let's take a look at one other. That was with an individual who has cerebral palsy. And this is an individual who has multiple sclerosis. Again, I want to know what do you think in terms of the reasoning why this particular pattern would emerge? So you notice here that her steps are pretty short. Her arms do not tick back and forth. Her left arm is pretty tight. Reaching with her right arm, left arm isn't doing much. She starts with her right foot moves forward and left arm meets it. Right foot moves forward and the left foot meets it. All right, let's watch that one more time. So the right foot moves forward and then the left foot really just kind of swings to become an even stance again. Left arm is pretty tight. Right arm swings back and forth. All right, she reaches out to support herself with the right arm. So the right arm is, and the right side here seems to be a little bit less stiff. All right, and it seems as though her right side is able to establish more of a pendulum activity with her leg. So where does this gait pattern come from? I don't think that necessarily this woman wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to walk this way. I don't necessarily think that she's ever thought about walking that way. So where does walking that way come from? Well, I think that probably the walking that way comes from, and let's just talk about this, all right? With cerebral palsy, there's an effect, a negative impact on muscle timing. And let's just show here. So here at the top, you have an individual who has CP, cerebral palsy, and an individual at the bottom who does not have cerebral palsy. And let's take a look at the top two graphs here, this gluteus medius and semimembranosus. And we'll also take a look at the biceps femoris. It seems like for the individual without cerebral palsy, the gluteus medius is firing and then it stops. It allows for the biceps femoris to kick in and fire. The biceps femoris shuts down, and then there's another activation pattern for the gluteus medius. Same thing with the semimembranosus. There seems to be activation and then a shutdown while the biceps femoris is kicking in, and then you see it continues on. But here with the gluteus medius and the semimembranosus, there's no real time where the muscle is off. Now, granted, the intensity of the signal is much less here than it is for the individual who does not have CP, but it seems as though this muscle is always firing and this muscle is always firing. So this is going to affect the way that the leg swings like a pendulum. All of the muscles are firing at the wrong time. Right? You see the biceps femoris here, the long head, there's very, very little actual firing here at all. So the ability for this individual to use their muscles as escapements, to use their muscles to conserve and store kinetic and potential energy is disrupted for sure. So because of this change in muscle timing, they're not able to conserve energy the same way that we're able to conserve energy. So what happens is there's a change in the walking pattern that occurs. But the change in walking pattern isn't abnormal. It might not be the walking pattern that you or I choose, or that emerges rather for you and I, but it's a very normal walking pattern for somebody who has cerebral palsy. One of the things that we do as human beings is we try to conserve energy. So let's say we have this situation here, and this is time here. And this is energy, and we can talk about energy in terms of the amount of oxygen that's spent, VO2 max. And as an individual walks, all right, what usually will happen, and let me actually just erase this right here. All right, as an individual walks, maybe we can call this here at the bottom, we'll call this speed or velocity. Whoops. We'll call this velocity, or I don't even know necessarily if we have to label it for right now. Usually what will happen is an individual will do activities in general, so that they can reduce the amount of energy spent. Now, if I walk too slow, all right, I have to use my muscles eccentrically, and I have to kind of fire my muscles ineffectively if I'm walking too slow at a low enough velocity. If that's the case, that my muscles have to overwork in order to slow themselves down enough, and the amount of oxygen that's utilized is going to increase at very low walking speeds. Same thing if I walk at very fast walking speeds. I'm going to have to overexert my muscles, and as a result, I'm going to have to use more oxygen. But there's like a point right in the middle of my walking velocity where I'm using the least amount of oxygen, the least amount of energy. That's going to be your preferred walking speed. Nobody walks at 0.2 miles an hour, slow-mo, and nobody walks really, really fast. And if you're going to walk fast and your amount of energy that you're spending is too high, what's going to happen here is you're going to transition from a walk to a jog. But when you're walking, there's a walking speed here. Usually that's about a little bit more than, say, 1 or 2 miles an hour or so. That is your preferred walking speed. And at that preferred walking speed, you use the least amount of energy to get the best result. That's the definition of resonance. When a system is working at resonant frequency, it uses the least amount of energy to get the greatest result, the greatest amplitude. That's usually what human beings do. We set up systems, and we set up, when you're stuffing envelopes, you move the piles in the right direction, in the right distance away from your hands. You move the stapler in just the right spot, so that instead of having to reach over here and then reach over there and reach over here and reach over there, You kind of like reach around in a circle and staple it, reach around a circle and staple it, reach around it. And you organize the system so that the least amount of energy can occur and you get the best result. When that occurs, you've reached your highest point of efficiency. So for an individual who has CP and an individual has, another walking disorder or issues with walking, they're actually establishing the most appropriate walking pattern for themselves. Or I'd rather say that the walking pattern that's going to take advantage of this situation emerges for that individual. So for me, the walking pattern might be more of a pendulum walking pattern where I take advantage of my anterior tibialis muscle firing eccentrically and storing energy and allowing for my my lower leg to come up and over my axis of rotation. But for somebody who has CP, they have co-contraction. The muscles are all stiff and firing all at the same time. My leg just simply can't function like a pendulum. And sometimes with CP, it's more of a one side of the brain versus the other side of the brain. So maybe one side of the body can swing like a pendulum, but the other side of the body has this co-contraction where all of your muscles are firing all at the same time and all at once. And that stiffens up the limb, whether or not it's an arm or a leg or whatever. And if your limb is stiff and your protagonist and antagonist muscles are firing at the same time, there's no possibility for that leg to swing like a pendulum, and therefore there's no opportunity for that leg to conserve kinetic and potential energy. So for an individual who has CP to walk like a pendulum, it might in fact actually make this energy need or the amount of oxygen that that individual utilizes, it might make it so that that increases. And if that's the case, a pendulum walking style for that individual is actually not normal or effective for them. So typically an individual is going to establish a walking pattern that is going to be normal and effective for their muscular system. So for somebody who does have CP or multiple sclerosis, the goal isn't necessarily to make their walking pattern more normal looking, quote. The goal is to manage their walking pattern so that they use the least amount of energy to get out what they need. So our goal as a physical therapist or an athletic trainer is not necessarily to seek normalcy. The goal is to make it so that people can function as best as they can. All right, so what I want to do is go over maybe just a couple of terms here. Maybe I'll open this up. There's a little bit of a plug for me. Let's clear these drawings. So it could be the case that as we move on into our career, our goal isn't necessarily to fix everybody. All right, it's to work with everybody and manage everybody effectively. But let's just see where everything kind of fits in. So when I was younger, I really wanted to be a surgeon, but that really quickly, I guess, became evident that I wasn't going to do that because I don't like blood and I don't like sadness and I don't like death. So I had to figure out some other way to assist people. I didn't know exactly where I fit in. And then when I went to school, somebody showed me this NAGI model of disablement. So over here is, we'll label it disablement. Disablement. All right, and then the beginning of this little continuum here, all the way on the other side, is a pathology. All right, now it's not the case that a doctor and a nurse and a PT and a AT and an OT do the same thing. In fact, I don't do anything at the pathology level, and I don't do anything at the disablement level necessarily. All right, so the next stage here, if I can draw it effectively or right in that amount of space, is an impairment. Impairment, an impairment. And then the next level here is called dysfunction. And when I have something like cerebral palsy or multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease, it's going to affect each level of this Naggy model differently. So let's go like this. Let's say, for instance, I have two things here. At first, I have cerebral palsy. That's the pathology. All right, now cerebral palsy is going to be caused potentially at birth by a reduction in oxygen to the brain. That's the actual pathology, but I could have other pathologies too. I could say, for instance, have something like Parkinson's disease. I could have something like a broken ankle. There should be an E there. Let's go undo, undo, undo a broken ankle. Now, those pathologies are all going to potentially impact gait, but they're going to impact gait differently. So the problem with PD is I have not enough dopamine. But the impairment is going to potentially be different. So let's just talk about the next step here. Now, this is the level that a doctor would work at. If somebody has cerebral palsy and they have a reduction in oxygen, doctor would come in and maybe the doctor would assign physical therapy or whatever it is. Or if an individual has Parkinson's disease and they have a reduction in dopamine, then what they could do is the doctor would prescribe levodopa or some way to increase the amount of dopamine. If somebody comes to a doctor with a broken ankle, then the doctor would put that person in a cast. Then eventually what they would do is they would refer that individual to a physical therapist or something. But a doctor and a physical therapist don't have to do the same thing. They don't do the same thing. A doctor works at this pathology level. Now, let's just talk about the impairment. Somebody who has cerebral palsy, who has a reduction in oxygen, they're going to have dyskinetic movement. So maybe the impairment that they have is increased stiffness. Increased stiffness in their muscles. Or they have a reduction in timing problems. So what is the pathology going to cause? The pathology is going to cause timing issues. It's going to cause stiffness. It's going to cause a reduction in the ability to use your leg as a pendulum. And I'll just write P-E-N-D. Or maybe I'll just write it all out. So that your leg can't swing and conserve energy anymore. For an individual who has Parkinson's disease, maybe the impairment is reduced visual acuity. All right, and in some instances, you're going to see that there's also a change in timing in terms of muscle firing. And for this individual who has a broken ankle, the impairment might be different. That might be swelling. It might be a reduction in mobility. All right, a reduction in mobility, to say the least, with a broken ankle. Now, each one of these little situations here is going to potentially make it so that the individual cannot walk. They have a difficult time walking, or they have a difficult time using their arms to reach. There's a dysfunction potentially with reaching. Remember, with the individual who had cerebral palsy, she only reached to the tree with one arm. All right, with an individual who has a Parkinson's disease, you could also have a difficult time walking. But you can also have a difficult time, say for instance, talking, because your gesticulation of your lips and tongue don't potentially work effectively. For an individual who has a broken ankle, their problem is they can't walk on it. So a doctor is going to work at this pathology level here. If they can't fix cerebral palsy, then what they're going to do is they're going to refer that person to somebody who can work at this impairment level. And at that impairment level, they're going to try to work on reducing stiffness, increasing flexibility, work on muscle timing, work on strength training. They're going to try to improve the ability for this person to use their arm as a pendulum so that they can conserve potential and kinetic energy. An individual who has Parkinson's disease, they're going to try to potentially give them virtual reality or tinted glasses that improve visual perception. Or at this level here, they're still going to be working on increasing muscle strength, increasing flexibility so that they can improve muscle timing. An individual with a broken ankle, once they get out of that cast, they're going to work on reducing swelling, increasing mobility. So this level here, and let me erase this here. Let me just erase this so I have a little bit more room. This level here is where our doctor would function at. This is our doctor level. All right, but a doctor isn't going to be working at the impairment level. At the impairment level is going to be more of like a physical therapist. Or even for sports related things, maybe an athletic trainer. But what happens if the physical therapist and the doctor, they couldn't get this person to function, air quote, normally, end air quote? What do you do then? Well, then you'd have to maybe pass this person off from a PT and AT to maybe an OT, occupational therapist. And that occupational therapist isn't going to be working on, range of motion and strength and flexibility. That occupational therapist might be working on helping them walk better, helping them reach to a shelf so that they can, or helping them get out of bed and bed transfers, all right? Same thing with somebody who's an occupational therapist with somebody who has PD. Maybe what they're going to do is work on getting this person up and down stairs or to be able to express themselves differently. All right, the person who's working on occupational therapy here is going to get this person who has a broken ankle to walk more effectively. or to walk without a crutch or something like that. So there's a pathology level, an impairment level, a dysfunction level, and a disablement level. Because this individual can't walk and can't reach, it could be that they can't go to work. All right, and when they can't go to work, then all of a sudden their ability to function in society is compromised. And the definition of a disablement or being disabled is not that you have a pathology, because that pathology may not negatively impact your ability to function in society. It could be the case that somebody who has a broken ankle can not walk, but because they have a cast and crutches, they can go to work, and therefore they're not negatively impacted in the way that they function in society. It could be the case that somebody doesn't have a pathology, they don't have an impairment, they don't have a dysfunction necessarily, but they do feel as though that they're disabled. So you don't necessarily have to have a pathology to be disabled. Or you could have a pathology and an impairment and even a dysfunction, but because you have help from other people, you're still able to function in society, and therefore your level of perceived disablement may be non-existent. It could be the case. So I always struggled, if I'm not going to be a doctor, what do I do? What do I do in order to help people? I try to work at this either educational or this disablement level. And if there weren't these 3 or 4 different levels, rather 4, then a doctor would be the only person that I'd need to see. Why would I need to see a PT or an OT or have a professor, for instance, if a doctor worked at the pathology level and the impairment level and the dysfunction level and the disablement level? A doctor works at the pathology level. If the doctor can't fix the pathology, then they refer you to a PT. Then the PT doesn't work at the pathology level. The PT isn't going to provide levodopa. The PT is going to provide strength, flexibility, timing. They're going to try to reduce the impairment. They're going to try to make it so that the muscles are stronger, less atrophied. The muscles are more flexible. And then once that PT is over, I mean, like, you have insurance. Insurance is going to give you PT for a couple of weeks. Now, once that PT bout ends, there could still be a problem with walking and reaching and all of these functions. Then those dysfunctions might make it so that they can't get on a bus, that they can't go to work. All right, then what do you do? Well, you have to have other people who can talk about things like order and control parameters, constraints, and things that maybe the doctor isn't really necessarily thinking of. And our goal isn't necessarily to make people walk normally, because normal to you is different than normal to me. And normal in any instance means, I think personally, normal means efficient. All right, using the least amount of energy, the least amount of oxygen, conserving the most amount of energy at any given time, so that the walking patterns, the movement patterns, the functional patterns that do occur require the least amount of energy for me to establish those patterns. So as you go further into your career, what I would suggest is figure out where you fit in. Are you trying to work at a pathology level? Are you trying to work on reducing impairment or increasing function, or somebody who's like a caseworker, or even maybe a psychologist, or um, like for instance, me, I'm not a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor. I also don't have a physical therapy degree because I got a research degree. I'm also not an occupational therapist. Does that mean that I'm just out of the loop, that I can't help people? Well, I think that what I can do is I can educate people. I can work on educating you guys so that you can become a PT or a doctor or an OT, and you can work on this impairment and dysfunction level. It gives us all a position in our field, because if everybody was a doctor, then you wouldn't need to have PTs and OTs. If a doctor could do all of this stuff, then it leaves us without a job. So what I try to do is I try to think about, how am I going to be able to help an individual who has a pathology and potentially an impairment? How do I help them improve function so their ability to be a grandmother, or to be a worker, or to be a bus driver, or to be anything that they choose to be, can emerge? So I would argue that our goal is not necessarily to fix everybody, it's to manage everybody so that they can manage themselves in our complex society. So as you move forward into your careers, what I would suggest is think about what level of interaction you want, and what level of interaction is your willingness and your schooling going to allow you to function at. And as long as you're helping everybody achieve who they're trying to achieve, then I think that's the goal. And the goal isn't necessarily to make everybody look the same or function, quote, normally, because those people are functioning the best they can function for themselves already. So how do we reduce energy cost? How do we make it so that they can get on a bus? How do we make it so that they can go to work? How do we make it so that this individual has reduced pain? How do we make it so that that individual can see their grandkids? How do we make it so that individual can go to Thanksgiving and spend time with their loved ones? And I think that that's a different goal than seeking normalcy. All right, so I think that that's probably where I want to finish up today. Does anybody have any questions about what we talked about, or does anybody have any comments about where they feel as though they fit in that NAGI model of disablement? And hopefully, as you go into your graduate career or whatever, when you think about that NAGI model, it gives you a little bit more options. I was always really sad that I wasn't going to be a professor, that I wasn't going to be a surgeon. I was always kind of felt like I let myself down a little bit. But now that I know where I fit in, I feel much better about my ability to contribute to our community as a whole. And for me, when I feel as though I can contribute to my community, I feel fulfilled. I sincerely appreciate the opportunity that you guys have presented to me to continue teaching, because I feel as though teaching is where I fit in that paradigm. And although I'm not a surgeon, I did get a doctorate, and I do try to contribute in the best way that I feel I can. And I certainly do feel thankful, and I feel fulfilled with what I'm doing. John, Zach, Emily, do you have any comments about anything we discussed today?
No, thank you.
All right, keep that in mind as you make choices to go into the next phase of your endeavors. And if you need anything, please just feel free to reach out. Okay. I hope that you guys have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Enjoy time with friends and family. And I'll see you guys on Monday, where we'll do a review for the final exam. If you have any outstanding exam edits or anything like that, please get things passed in so that I can do my job before the end of the semester. And that should be it. Okay. Enjoy your Thanksgiving. Thank you for the opportunity to keep teaching.